Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The annual UBCM convention starts today. One of the big issues they face is the use of illicit drugs in public spaces. And so they discussed that this morning. We'll take your calls along with reporter Justin McElroy and advocate Guy Felicella. After 12:30, what are your favorite fall outdoor activities in BC? I'm Michelle Eliot. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. Welcome to you. Well, today the annual Union of BC Municipalities convention started, and one big issue, as I mentioned, that is faced by BC towns and cities is drug policy. Now, this morning, politicians, along with Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry and others, discussed drug decriminalization in BC. As you know, for 8 months, it has been legal to possess 2.5 grams of opioids, cocaine, and methamphetamines, or MDMA. But last week, the province introduced a change. Starting today, possession of those drugs within 15 meters of a playground, spray park, wading pool, or skate park will be prohibited. You'll recall BC brought in this pilot program on decriminalization to try and stem the tide of toxic drug deaths in our province. In a moment, we'll ask for your thoughts on this. Has public use of illicit drugs been an issue in your community? How do we protect public safety while supporting the well-being of drug users? You can call us on that, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. By email, you can reach us at bctoday@cbc.ca. We're going to hear from an advocate in just a few moments from now. But first up, we're joined by our municipal affairs reporter, Justin McElroy, who has been monitoring the session. And he's with me in our studio. Hi, Justin.
Hi, Michelle.
Thanks for being here with us. And the morning started off, or one of the main speakers was Dr. Bonnie Henry, around this session that was billed as a conversation on decriminalization and public use. And so we've been hearing this conversation from the province as well when it comes to spray parks and places where children are usually visiting. So what did Bonnie Henry have to say this morning?
Yeah, it was an interesting conversation. So as you said, the beginning of January this year, possession of certain drugs decriminalized. Over the past 9 months since then, we've heard from a lot of different municipalities that have said, we're having issues around the regulations here, how there's a lack of bylaws and enforcement that we can put in for this, like we can for, say, smoking or alcohol use, and asking for the province to give them more tools to try and deal with the offspring effects in their communities, or the perceived offspring effects. Of course, last week, then the province made that announcement that the federal government had given them the authority to put in those new regulations, making it so that possession in next to playgrounds or spray parks is banned. But today, the province also announced that there will be new legislation coming in the fall, so just in the next month or two, that will expand upon that will put new regulations in place that will potentially prohibit drug use in more public areas, perhaps sports fields, perhaps to other places as well, giving more guidance on bylaws and trying to meet what municipalities have been telling them over the past few months. So the province and Dr. Bonnie Henry said, we hear you, we believe in decriminalization, we want to see this pilot through, but we want to create a better balance than maybe we've had over the past few months in addressing some of your concerns.
Okay, and we'll get to the reaction as well to that from the municipalities and people who were at the UBCM today. But first, let's hear a little bit of what Dr. Bonnie had to say about safer supply being a potentially life-saving intervention, particularly in communities in the north and remote areas of the province.
We need to look at how do we do it in a way that minimizes harms, and we know that there are challenges with that, and that provides a pharmaceutical-grade alternative for people and what they need. So lots more to do.
And so first, Justin, what was the reaction then to the new possible legislation coming and to these steps that the province has taken? What did municipalities have to say?
You know, a lot of municipalities have been consulted on this over the past few months, 45 in total, the provincial government said. So none of this was a surprise. There was a lot of questions essentially from people. You know, one of them, she addressed there in a sense where there's the decriminalization aspect, but people asking where's the safe supply, where are the consumption sites, particularly in smaller communities where you don't have the number of wraparound resources that you do have in Metro Vancouver, Victoria, and other bigger municipalities as well. Overall, the tone, you know, if you had to sum it up, and there's so many people, there was about 200 or 300 people packed into this room, mayors, councillors across the province.
Record attendance, as I understand?
2,000 delegates in total this year. A lot of people, it's new mayors and councillors. We just had an election. This is their first chance to gather as a group. But generally, the tenor was, we support decriminalization. We want to be partners with the provincial government on this, but we don't feel that we've been given the supports necessary, and we don't feel at this point that the public is as on board as they could be or need to be for this to be a success in our communities based on what we've seen. So the province trying to address that a little bit today. Obviously, the legislation will be coming as well, but they reaffirmed their commitment to this pilot program, to decriminalization. Dr. Henry saying we can't arrest our way out of this. So we can't have illicit drug use happening in the shadows, happening in the back alleys, and mayors and councillors saying, yes, we agree, but with a lot of caveats raised over the course of this 2-hour session today.
Okay, we're taking your calls on this as well. Right now, Justin McElroy joining me, our municipal affairs reporter here at CBC, watching and monitoring that discussion this morning around drug decriminalization and public use. And so we're asking you, has public use of illicit drugs been an issue in your community? And how do we protect public safety while supporting the well-being of drug users in BC? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. And so, Justin, you heard there what Dr. Henry had to say about safe supply, and you've been talking about those, you know, the perceived offspring effects of decriminalization, but also the cities and towns saying they need support to be able to provide, you know, whatever interventions are needed. You know, last week, Insight marked 20 years in Vancouver, the first supervised injection site in North America. So, for municipalities now, given the challenges that they're facing, what discussion is there around providing those spaces, those safer consumption sites?
Well, and a big issue here is that it's not municipalities that have the funding and the resources to create these sites. It's the provincial government, right? And so what we heard from a lot of different towns today is, look, we're there, we're willing, we're ready to be partners with you on this, but the sort of support surfaces that you're putting in place in the Vancouvers and Victorias, we need to see in the Campbell Rivers and the Smithers and the Invermeres and all these other places as well. We want to be able to have these services available, but they're not there. And as a result, a lot of people saying that it falls on the nonprofits that are already in place, on the 2 or 3 real community leaders who have been in the forefront in these smaller communities, and saying that at a certain point there becomes an exhaustion setting in if you keep waiting for this to happen. The mayor of Smithers, Gladys Attrill, saying that a per capita approach to beds needs to happen, that when Vancouver gets 100, Smithers should at least get 2 or 3. And that can be hard given how the province rolls these things out in the bigger communities first. But that was a real focal point of discussion over the past couple hours.
Okay, the spread of those supports and the concentration of them. Let's take a call now asking you for your thoughts on this as well. Our numbers again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. In light of decriminalization, the province now bringing in prohibitions or saying you can't use or possess illicit drugs, methamphetamines, MDMA, opioids, and cocaine, 2.5 grams of which are allowed for personal possession. You can't have them within 15 meters of spaces like like playgrounds and spray parks and wading pools and skate parks, and the argument from the province saying this is about protecting children. So we're asking you what your thoughts are on that. How do we protect public safety as well as support the well-being of drug users as well? That's our discussion today here on BC Today. Let's go to Cosima now, who's joining us from a rural community, Kimberley. Hi there, Cosima.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for calling in.
Yeah, so I understand, public safety issues, although this is a public safety because drug users are the public as well. This comes down for me to, it's a housing issue, and that's the issue when you talk about it all the time. People don't want to be using in parks. They don't want to be homeless. It's a mental health crisis. It's a housing crisis. And those are huger things than we can tackle, individual municipalities or towns and cities. This is a Canada-wide crisis, these things. So what they could do now is safe injection sites, give people a place to go. They don't want to be in these parks and, in outdoor use, so give them at least a place to go. And safe injection sites, it's been proven they're helpful.
And I'll ask you, just a follow up to that is, addressing the concern around people using alone, Cosima.
Well, and that's why safe injection sites are, they have saved so many thousands of lives. And just having someone there who, will check on you. And as we know, that's also the biggest, it's young men using alone and in their own homes. This is something, our loneliness and our isolation, too, leads to this. But ultimately, I think the measure is great because we do need to keep kids safe and public safe, but people don't want to be living in parks.
So it's the measure works as a balance, but the need for housing to support people. Cosima.
And mental health and, and giving them the help they need for whatever they're abusing, getting into recovery. But we know that all of that starts with a safe place to live. Because if you don't have that, you don't have any of the other things.
Starting with a safe place to live. Cosima, thank you very much for your call. Appreciate hearing from you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. You've heard this, Justin. Yeah, right. It starts with
We
housing.
hear this all the time, right? It's the overlapping crises of housing, of decriminalization, of mental health. One of the speakers at the panel this morning, Nadine Nakagawa, New Westminster councillor, who has been a vocal advocate of decriminalization, but she said, look, 2 years ago in New Westminster, council passed a vote to rezone an area for supportive housing. There was backlash in the community, but they pushed really hard to make this happen. 2 years later, she says it's still not built. And all those units that are intended for the most marginalized people in their community still not there 2 years later. So this is when we talk about housing and we talk about the provincial government, as Cosima talked about, how municipalities can't do this by themselves. These are some of the strains that you hear from mayors and councillors in terms of just what needs to happen. And even if the province is committed to making things happen, how slowly sometimes that actually takes place.
Okay. And certainly an ongoing discussion. Justin, a comment from Ian by email. About time they're decriminalizing, but in terms of restraining people from using in parks, why not make it like our liquor laws so you can't consume in public? A closing comment on that?
Yeah, and that's something the province has said that they're going to be looking at as part of their legislation, acknowledging that there lacks sort of the regulations and language around drug use as we do have for liquor and cigarettes. So I expect in the fall that will be something that comes up in some form. Whether it'll please every municipality, maybe a little bit of a different question.
Justin, thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle.
Good to have you. That's Justin McElroy, CBC Vancouver's Municipal Affairs reporter. He'll be covering the UBCM this week as it takes place. And as you heard him say, record attendance for this week's annual conference. This is BC Today here on CBC Radio 1 and as well live streaming on cbc.ca/BC and on our website as well as YouTube as well. CBC Vancouver is where you can find us, or you can use the CBC Gem app. And yes, over 2,300 people died in BC from toxic drugs. More than 1,400 have died from unregulated drugs between January to July of this year, which puts the province on pace to potentially exceed the deaths that were recorded last year. So we're taking your calls on that and the amendment to decriminalization in BC that the province brought in last week, which is that possession within 15 meters by a park, a playground rather, a spray park, a wading pool, or a skate park would be prohibited. We're asking for your thoughts. Has illegal drug use been an issue in your community? Public illegal drug use, and asking you as well, how can we support the well-being of drug users as well as protect public safety? How do you balance those two things? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 rather on your cell phone. And reaction has been coming in to that decision by the province to restrict or prohibit the possession of illegal drugs near playgrounds and other areas used by children. And that's for the duration of the province's decriminalization pilot project. Fiona Wilson is the vice president of the BC Associations of Chiefs of Police, and she told CBC's On the Coast that this amendment would give police more tools to deal with public complaints.
I mean, what we were really advocating for as police is the tools to approach someone who's using in problematic circumstances. And this goes a long way to assist with that. I did 3 tours of duties in the downtown east side and had an opportunity to speak to people who use drugs on a regular basis. And I can tell you that the vast, vast majority of them go to exceptional lengths to avoid using in front of children in any event. I saw that all the time when I worked, particularly in the downtown east side. You know, these circumstances are rare where someone is using in places where there are children and youth present. But when that does occur, it can be very, very upsetting for parents and families and children and youth themselves. So I think that this is a good step forward in terms of giving police the tools to address this type of behavior.
That's Fiona Wilson, Vice President of the BC Associations of Chiefs of Police. We have some breaking news right now. In the House of Commons, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is addressing the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. We're taking you to Ottawa live.
Report of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. In relation to the Conflict of Interest Act for the fiscal year ended March 31, 2023.
1083H. This document is deemed to have been permanently referred to the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Tabling of documents, the Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to table in both official languages the report on the procurement and distribution of COVID-19 rapid tests. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Tabling of documents, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 36.8a, I have the honour to table in both official languages the government's responses to 34 petitions. These returns will be tabled in an electronic format. Brilliant.
Good job.
Dépôt de projet de loi émanant du gouvernement.
Introduction of government bills.
Statements by ministers. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, today I'm rising to inform the House of an extremely serious matter. I just informed the leaders of the opposition directly, but I want now to speak with all Canadians. Over the past number of weeks, Canadian security agencies have been actively pursuing credible allegations of a potential link between agents of the Government of India and the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Canada is a rule of law country. The protection of our citizens and defense of our sovereignty are fundamental. Our top priorities have therefore been, 1, that our law enforcement and security agencies ensure the continued safety of all Canadians, and 2, that all steps be taken to hold perpetrators of this murder to account. Canada has declared its deep concerns to the top intelligence and security officials of the Indian government. Last week at the G20, I brought them personally and directly to Prime Minister Modi in no uncertain terms. Any involvement of a foreign government in the killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil is an unacceptable violation of our sovereignty. It is contrary to the fundamental rules by which free, open, and democratic societies conduct themselves. As you would expect, we've been working closely and coordinating with our allies on this very serious matter. In the strongest possible terms, I continue to urge the Government of India to cooperate with Canada to get to the bottom of this matter. I also expect it to reiterate that its position on extrajudicial operations in another country is clearly and unequivocally in line with international law. I know many Canadians, particularly members of the Indo-Canadian community, are feeling angry or perhaps frightened right now. Let us not allow this to change us. Let us remain calm and steadfast in our commitment to our democratic principles and our adherence to the rule of law. This is who we are and what we do as Canadians. Monsieur le Président, je me lève aujourd'hui.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to inform the House of Commons of an extremely serious issue. I just informed the leaders of the opposition directly. I now want to address Canadians. Over the last weeks, Canadian intelligence agencies have looked actively into credible allegations according to which there is a possible link between agents of the Government of India and the murder of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Canada is a state that upholds the rule of law. We protect our citizens and our sovereignty. These are essential. Our priorities were, first of all, to ensure that our security agencies permanently ensure the security of all Canadians and that all necessary measures be taken to hold those responsible for this murder accountable for what they did. Canada has expressed its concerns to high-level security and intelligence agencies of India. Last week, during the G20, I raised the issue very clearly with the Prime Minister Modi. The implication, or rather involvement, of any foreign government in the murder of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil is a violation, an unacceptable violation of our sovereignty. Such an act runs against the fundamental rules that operate for free, open, and democratic societies. We are working seriously on this file in coordination with our main allies. I continue to ask with a great deal of firmness that the Government of India cooperate with Canada to shed light on this situation. I also expect that the Government of India will reaffirm that its position on extrajudicial operations is clearly and unequivocally in line with international law. I know that many Canadians, especially members of the Indian community in India, are angry. They might even be frightened. We cannot let this change us. Let's remain calm and determined in our commitment to maintaining our democratic principles and upholding the rule of law. Let us remain true to who we are as Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Moments ago, the Prime Minister made me aware of intelligence from his authorities linking the Indian government to the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Before going any further, let me offer my condolences to the family of Hardeep Singh Nijjar in the loss that this represents and the outrageous murder that brought it about. If these allegations are true, they represent an outrageous affront to Canada's sovereignty. Our citizens must be safe from extrajudicial killings of all kinds, most of all from foreign governments. Canadians deserve to be protected on Canadian soil. We call on the Indian government to act with utmost transparency as authorities investigate this murder, because the truth must come out. We must know who performed the assassination and who was behind the assassination. Conservatives will continue to work to get these answers. All Canadians now stand with diaspora communities of Indian origin. And it is now in this time that the official opposition makes an appeal for calm. We are all Canadians. This is our country. We must be united for our home and for each other. Let us all join arms, lock arms and join hands in condemning this murder, standing with the family and friends of its victim. Let us all put aside our differences to stand up for the rule of law. One law for all of our people, a law made in this chamber by Canadians for Canadians. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We were just informed about this situation. We were stunned and shocked. It's entirely unacceptable, of course. First of all, I want to offer my condolences to the family and friends who were impacted by this act. Foreign countries have to respect our borders. It's up to our authorities to intervene on our territory to uphold our laws. We are a state with rule of law. Without exception, everyone has to respect this. It's a clear message that Parliament must convey to the guilty and to those who are the subject of what we're saying today. We have to remain calm, pay attention to developments in this file. In the meantime, the Bloc Québécois is offering its full cooperation to the Prime Minister for a situation that we cannot accept.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
What we've just learned today in the House is something that shocks the safety and security that so many Canadians rely on. It is outrageous, it is shocking, and it is going to have deep and devastating impacts to Canadians. I want to also begin by acknowledging the family of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, the family who's now learning that the loss of their loved one was potentially directly related to Indian government involvement. I spoke with Hardeep Singh Nijjar's son, and I could hear the pain of that loss in his voice. And I can only imagine how much more painful it is going to be knowing of this potential connection. On a personal reflection, I want to share with you what this means to the Sikh community. I grew up hearing many stories that if you raised concerns about human rights violations in India, that you might be denied a visa, that if you went back to India, you could suffer violence, torture, and even death. I grew up hearing those stories. But to hear the Prime Minister of Canada corroborate a potential link between a murder of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil by a foreign government is something I could never have imagined. To understand what that means to the community, this is a place that so many people around the world have sought as refuge. People have fled persecution in their home countries, where they were threatened by torture and violence and death, to come to Canada as a beacon of safety. a place where you could be safe, free from violence, be able to speak your thoughts, speak your mind, and not worry if you would wake up dead the next day or someone you loved would be tortured or killed. That safety and security that so many Canadians feel has now been rocked. It has been shocked and it's been destabilized. I want to send a message directly to activists across our country who have fled persecution, who speak truth to power, knowing of the real dire consequences to themselves and potentially their family. I want to speak directly to people of Indian descent who have come to Canada, who spoke justice and spoke truth to power, who challenged the oppressive practices of India, caste violence, violence against women, systemic abuse of minority communities, systemic abuse of the poor. I want to speak directly to those activists. Governments around the world are trying to silence you. The Indian government and the Modi government specifically is attempting to silence you. But truth cannot be silenced. Justice cannot and will not be silenced. We know that the practice of the Indian government has been one of division, of violence, persecution, attacking those that are critical of the government. It is now an important time to send a clear message. As a democratic country, as a country that respects the rule of law, what will be our response? I want people to know that as leader of the New Democratic Party, I will use every tool at my disposal to ensure that Canada uses every tool and every power of a democratic nation to bring those responsible to justice. That's right. We will ensure that no rock is unturned, that every possible link will be examined, that the public inquiry should also turn its eye to this with the full rigor of that public inquiry. We need to know the truth. We need to know all potential links, and anyone and everyone responsible should be brought to justice using the full power of a democratic nation. I call on our allies to condemn this violence, this direct violation of a sovereign nation's rights, to condemn this act in the harshest terms possible. This will require all democratic nations to come together to send a clear message about what this means, that a foreign nation kills a Canadian on Canadian soil. This is something that all democratic nations have to stand up and denounce clearly. And finally, I want to send a clear message to many people who are here learning of this and will be angry, are going to be afraid. And I understand why you would be angry and afraid. I call for everyone who is hearing this news now to come together, and not in anger, but in love for justice. There's a Sikh practice that the love of justice is what we should focus on, not the anger and the frustration and the fear. Focus on the love for justice, and I will do my part. We will do our part in this chamber to ensure that justice is served using every tool that a democratic nation can do. ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੈਂ ਇਹ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਸੁਣਿਆ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਛੋਟੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੂੰ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੀ ਹਕੂਮਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ੁਲਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਪਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਇੱਥੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ 'ਚ ਇੱਥੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹਾ ਖਤਰਾ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਮੈਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ ਤੇ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਕੁ ਮੇਰਾ ਤਾਕਤ ਹੈਗਾ ਮੈਂ ਹਟੂੰਗਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਦ ਤੱਕ ਜਸਟਿਸ ਤੇ ਇਨਸਾਫ ਮਿਲੂਗਾ ਇਸ ਮਾਮਲੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੈਂ ਹਟਣਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ ਜਦ ਤੱਕ ਸਾਰੇ ਹੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਲਿੰਕ ਹੋਵੇ ਉਹਦਾ ਪੂਰੀ ਖੋਜ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਵੇ ਤੇ ਜੋ ਨਿਆਂ ਆ ਜੋ ਜਸਟਿਸ ਹੈ ਜੋ ਇਨਸਾਫ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਵੇ I want you to know you can trust that New Democrats and everyone in this House will fight with everything we have to ensure that this serious, reprehensible matter is treated with the utmost seriousness and focus and that we bring justice. Thank you.
I believe the honourable member for Sandwich Gulf Islands is rising on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I seek unanimous consent to join my colleagues in response to this horrific and chilling news that the Prime Minister has shared with us. I was particularly grateful for the tone taken, first person to speak after the Prime Minister, the leader of the official opposition. I heed his words that we link arms and join hands so that the quest for justice, which was just so passionately and eloquently spoke of, by the honorable member for Burnaby South, the leader of the Democratic Party. On behalf of all Greens, we pledge to join with our colleagues in nonpartisan fashion, support our government.
Member moving to, will please, motion please say nay. Nay, I'm afraid we don't have unanimous consent on that one. Okay, and now déclaration de ministre, l'honorable ministre du patrimoine canadien.
The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, we mark the invaluable contribution of a woman who paved the way for those who followed her into this chamber.
All right, you have been listening to the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of the NDP, and it was the Prime Minister who spoke.
You have just been listening to speakers in the House of Commons, Saanich Gulf Islands MP, Green Party leader Elizabeth May, just now speaking. You also heard from NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. Before him, opposition leader, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. They were reacting to statements from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Poilievre saying if the allegations are true, they represent an, quote, outrageous affront to Canada's sovereignty. He said he stands with diaspora communities of Indian origin. A few moments ago, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stood in the House of Commons accusing the government of India of being behind a fatal shooting on Canadian soil of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Now, Nijjar was a Canadian citizen, was a prominent community leader and proponent of an independent Sikh state. He was fatally shot outside the Guru Nanak Sikh Gurdwara on 120th Street in Surrey in June. And the Prime Minister said he has relayed his deep concerns to the top officials of the Indian government, including bringing it personally to the Indian Prime Minister. And he said, quote, in the strongest possible terms, I continue to urge the government of India to cooperate with Canada to get to the bottom of this matter. He said he was speaking to members of the Indo-Canadian community, whom he said may be feeling angry and frightened right now. And from Jagmeet Singh, NDP leader and MP of Burnaby South, also said that this was outrageous and shocking and would have deep and devastating impacts on Canadians. Singh acknowledged the family of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, and he also reflected on what the accusation means to the Sikh community. Singh said the safety and security so many Canadians feel has now been rocked, and he spoke to people of Indian descent who have come to Canada. Singh also called for a public inquiry to know, he said we need to know all the potential links and anyone and everyone responsible to be brought to justice. And so that breaking news coming from the House of Commons just a few moments ago. There will be much reaction to this story, of course, throughout the day here on CBC. You can continue to watch us on television, online as well, and go to our website, cbc.ca/news for the latest and for more in-depth coverage. Let's hear a little bit more of what the Prime Minister had to say.
Mr. Speaker, today I'm rising to inform the House of an extremely serious matter. I just informed the leaders of the opposition directly, but I want now to speak with all Canadians. Over the past number of weeks, Canadian security agencies have been actively pursuing credible allegations of a potential link between agents of the government of India and the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Canada is a rule of law country. The protection of our citizens and defense of our sovereignty are fundamental. Our top priorities have therefore been, one, that our law enforcement and security agencies ensure the continued safety of all Canadians, and two, that all steps be taken to hold perpetrators of this murder to account. Canada has declared its deep concerns to the top intelligence and security officials of the Indian government. Last week at the G20, I brought them personally and directly to Prime Minister Modi in no uncertain terms. Any involvement of a foreign government in the killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil is an unacceptable violation of our sovereignty. It is contrary to the fundamental rules by which free, open, and democratic societies conduct themselves. As you would expect, we've been working closely and coordinating with our allies on this very serious matter. In the strongest possible terms, I continue to urge the Government of India to cooperate with Canada to get to the bottom of this matter. I also expect it to reiterate that its position on extrajudicial operations in another country is clearly and unequivocally in line with international law. I know many Canadians, particularly members of the Indo-Canadian community, are feeling angry or perhaps frightened right now. Let us not allow this to change us. Let us remain calm and steadfast in our commitment to our democratic principles and our adherence to the rule of law. This is who we are and what we do as Canadians.
You were listening there to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Just a few minutes ago, he stood in the House of Commons accusing the government of India of being linked to the fatal shooting of Hardeep Singh Nijjar on Canadian soil in Surrey. We're going to continue to follow that story, of course, throughout the day here on CBC. It's 12:47. You're with BC Today here on CBC Radio 1. We're live streaming as well on YouTube at CBC Vancouver, on our website, cbc.ca/BC, or you may be using the CBC Gem app. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to go back to our lead story now here on BC Today. We were talking about the latest developments in our province's attempt to reduce deaths in the poison drug supply epidemic. Now, BC's 3-year decriminalization and safe supply pilot program started 8 months ago. There were concerns raised by municipalities, by the BC Association of Police Chiefs, and the public about public drug use around areas where children and youth are. And today, a new amendment takes effect, which prohibits drug use or possession of those illicit drugs within 15 meters of a playground, a spray park, a wading pool, or a skate park. And we have been taking your calls and your comments on this as well. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and pound 690 on your cell phone is how you can reach us. You can email us too, bctoday@cbc.ca. And Barry wrote us from Delta. So much gray area, hard to understand. If needles are involved, we need more oversight or intervention to first protect users and protect the public. Thank you very much for that email, bctoday@cbc.ca. We're joined now in studio by Guy Felicella, a harm reduction and recovery advocate and peer clinical advisor for the BC Centre on Substance Use. Guy, good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate your patience as well, sitting for a few minutes there as we listened and watched the Prime Minister. What do you make of this amendment that comes in today, saying that the possession of these illicit drugs would be prohibited from within 15 meters of playgrounds and spray parks and skate parks?
Well, I've always said that substance users don't want to go to these places to use substances, and I don't know how many are actually going to water parks and skate parks to actually use substances, but it also goes back to the other theme where municipalities don't have the proper services and support to support people who are using substances, such as OPS facilities. And so it seems to be that if you use substances and you are homeless and don't have a place in your municipality to go to, people are going to use publicly. And so we have to do a better job at making sure the proper services are in place for who are using these substances to go in. And I have 3 kids myself. I don't want my kids or anybody's kids picking up a needle or a pipe at a park, but also too, when people go in to use these services, the equipment that's left there is cleaned up by the staff. So it's not something that could be discarded onto the street as well. So we have to look at, how we can improve and what solutions are needed in every municipality.
So is it a matter of a lack of those facilities that are being provided then? In fact, more so, a bigger issue in rural communities in BC?
Most definitely, and it seems to be the majority of people asking for these amendments don't have the proper services in place to meet the needs of people. And sadly, what now happens is that, if people are using publicly and there's nowhere to go, they're going to isolate and use alone, back alleys, and, the catastrophic nature of this is that we could see more public overdoses in the communities outside.
In the absence of those facilities right now, what do you make of, we hear that there are complaints from the public. Apart from playgrounds, some municipalities have been, seeking greater power to restrict drug use in public spaces, parks and things like that. What do you make of the public perception of that?
Well, I think, the public has been, they have their concerns, and I understand them. Nobody, like I said, though, nobody wants to use in front of their kids. And so we have to really kind of look at, sure, is it concerning? Yes. Can we do better to, it's not that decriminalization isn't working. It is working because it's reducing the punishment for using substances for people who struggle with an addiction or a health condition instead of criminalizing it. But yet again, it goes back to the services that are missing in those communities where people don't have access to use.
You say decriminalization is working. What we hear from the provincial health officer, for example, is that it's just one part of the equation. Here we have, the numbers of deaths that we've seen just the first 6-7 months already on pace to surpass last year's of 2,300 people, 2,300 lives. What then do we need? What further measures are needed?
Yeah, honestly, the pilot project of decriminalization doesn't change the unregulated drug supply. So that still consistently is the same because it's run by, organized crime and organized criminals. So that's not what decriminalization was meant for. It's meant for actually to, to stop criminalizing the person who's struggling. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it's working. But unfortunately, we just haven't had, the proper systems of care to remove people from the illicit drug supply, whether that's through access to detox services and treatment and recovery, or even for people who are using these illicit substances to have them use some safer substances while they're continuing to use these substances.
And we see, though, for example, BC United saying, they would roll back some aspects of decriminalization. What do you think of moves that way?
Well, I think it could be catastrophic. Like I said, where are people going to, actually go again? So we could actually see an increase in overdose deaths because, the importance of an OPS or an SCS is that it builds relationships with the people that are using substances. And, if you look at Insight, I think its referral rate was over, in its 20 years, over 70,000 people getting access to other services. And that does include detox and treatment. However, if we don't have a place where people are going and building those connections, what are we just doing? We're moving them along. We're doing the same things that we've done for years, and we obviously know that doesn't work. And in this day and age, with the drug supply so increasingly toxic day by day, we will see an increase of overdoses in the public, which will be devastating on the community, the families, and not only, obviously, the person himself, but, to see that or to hear that or to think that this is the possible outcome is catastrophic.
My guest for the remainder of the program is Guy Felicella, harm reduction and recovery advocate and a peer clinical advisor for the BC Centre on Substance Use. And given that the UBCM is discussing drug policy today, has been this morning with Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry, and in light of the province bringing in new prohibitions, changes to the amendment that allows for personal possession of small amounts of some illicit drugs, today what begins is the prohibition of that possession of those illicit drugs within 15 meters of places and public spaces where children are. things like playgrounds, spray parks, and wading pools. And so we're asking you if that's been an issue in your community in BC, and how do we balance protecting public safety while supporting the well-being of drug users. You can call us for the last few minutes of the program, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or pound 690. And so, Guy, how then do we get to that point where those services are built up?
Well, I think, the province has done their things to implement strategies. And then unfortunately, what's happening is that the municipalities are resistant to include these facilities in their municipalities. And so here's the challenge. It's like, we're in a public health emergency. 6 people are dying every day. Somebody isn't going to travel from Coquitlam into the downtown east side to use the supervised consumption site. So there needs to be more done in all municipalities. You can't just, cram everything into the downtown east side and expect people to go there to use substances. That's just not the case. And so we're not meeting the need of people who are using these substances. And it's not uncommon anymore for us to believe that people aren't using these substances already. They are. It's the amount of people tragically that lose their lives every day. It really goes to show that we are living in a society where people are, using drugs.
Guy, it's always good to hear from you, and thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
You take care.
Thanks.
Guy Felicella, a harm reduction and recovery advocate and peer clinical advisor for the BC Centre on Substance Use. It's just about 57 minutes past 12 o'clock now, 12:57, 1:57 in the Mountain Time Zone. And a top story today, of course, we just heard from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau standing in the House of Commons about half an hour ago, accusing the government of India of being behind the fatal shooting of Hardeep Singh Nijjar on Canadian soil. Now, Nijjar was a Canadian citizen and a prominent community leader, a proponent of an independent Sikh state. He was fatally shot outside the Guru Nanak Sikh Gurdwara in Surrey in June. And Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said he had relayed his deep concerns to the top officials of the Indian government, including bringing it personally to the Indian Prime Minister. And he said, quote, in the strongest possible terms, he continued to urge the government of India to cooperate with Canada to get to the bottom of this matter. He spoke as well to members of the Indo-Canadian community, whom he said may be feeling angry and frightened right now. We also heard from the opposition leaders, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, who said he found the accusations outrageous and shocking. And he also spoke and reflected on what the accusation means to the Sikh community. We heard from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, as well as Green Party leader and MP for Saanich Gulf Islands, Elizabeth May. So those comments from politicians today, there will be reaction chased here on CBC. So do continue to watch this story online and on our website. That's it for our program today. Thank you so much for joining us, and much more coverage, of course, throughout the day. I'm Michelle Eliot. Have a good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.